And for that, I'll always be indebted to this man, pure and simple.
Yeah, no, but we should be cautious because Errol stuck out like someone who immediately caught my attention because I had the feeling you had to be taken seriously. There were this absolute wildness of ideas floating around, and it just needed to take shape. And it needed a certain amount of discipline, which you still do not have when it comes to post-production, because that's where you waste too much money. And no, it's true, because a film, you have to make films where you have to expect to become profitable fairly early on. And when you spend too much money, then it's harder to get into that terrain. But I do not really mind, because that's the way you function. And you have to wrestle. You have to wrestle with your footage, with your material, like a whole group, the whole Laocoon group, with a snake with his 2 children and wrestling the snake. So if you don't have that, it probably would create a lifeless film. I don't know how you function, but it's the way it is, and the only thing that counts is the end result. The end result is always disciplined, but the way into it, I have my doubts. So.
Yeah. I have to say I share those doubts.
Yeah.
Errol mentioned your Rogue Film School,
yes.
and it raised the question for me, is for both of you, what is it that you feel people need to become a filmmaker? Errol, you talked about just the inspiration you took away from watching great films of Werner, but surely there's more that's needed than that, whether it's some aptitude with cameras or editing or mastery of production. Or I'm curious what each of you think of is necessary to become a filmmaker.
I would say the main ingredients are rage and a desire to get even with others.
Let me give a more prosaic answer, because you are aiming at the obvious, and we are not into the obvious. You have to understand music, and Errol does because he's a cello player. And you have to read. That's what I tell my students in the Rogue Film School. It's my first sentence every morning. Read, or else you'd never become a filmmaker. And a man like and I point out his examples. Errol Morris, he reads everything. I mean, about a failed lion tamer, the autobiography of a failed lion tamer, and on. But you can discuss Hölderlin with him, and you can, so it's this wide range of reading, and in the Rogue Film School for application, you have to follow instructions about, in my case, a mandatory reading list. And it starts with Roman antiquity, Virgil, Georgics. Read it, if possible, in Latin. It also includes, but it's quite a random list. It could be 3,000 other books. It includes the Poetic Edda, old Icelandic poetry 1,000 years back. It contains a short story by Hemingway, and it contains a Warren Commission report, which is an incredible piece of literature.
Fantastic reading.
And everybody, I hear even people who made films about Kennedy's assassination, including, what's his name, Oliver Stone. Oliver Stone hasn't read the book, hasn't read the Warren Commission report.
You know that you don't know, but I've been planning to do, it's, for me, my version of Tales from the Crypt. but it's Tales from the Warren Commission report.
Yes, but it's a wonderful piece of reading. It's one of those books where you rush,
Unreadable.
where you rush home just to continue reading. I remember, yes.
Unreadable.
No, it is. I disagree. It's absolutely readable. It's a fantastic piece of logic, and everybody denounces it, you including apparently. But it is, yes, it's easy to denounce it, but it's an incredible, conclusive sort of report, not written by one person, but by the whole commission. And it's real a great, wonderful crime story.
Well, it is.
Absolutely
it's one of the,
beautiful to read.
One of the great 20th century crime stories.
Yeah.
But I would define my reading somewhat differently. I would call it compulsive, unremitting, obsessive, often counterproductive reading.
Yeah, but it ultimately translates into something very, very coherent, into something unusual, and it's only by somebody who reads. If you wouldn't read, you would be nowhere. You wouldn't be a filmmaker. And people like, for example, Francis Ford Coppola has his own library. He even engages a librarian. Just think about that. Or Terrence Malick, whom I like, he reads, and he has been very much into academia, into philosophy, but a part of that, he's a man who reads. And I personally don't see that many films, but I read. I do read. And that's probably one of the keys to things, and it is something that gets lost in our type of civilization. People, yes, they read, but they read little snippets on Facebook or Twitter, or it's this kind of tiny little bits and pieces of information, which doesn't really give a good picture of what the real world is all about. It gives more an image of collective fantasies or collective paranoias, but not a description of what kind of world we live in.
Errol has recently taken to Twitter.
Unfortunately, my wife thinks that I have to be stopped at all cost.
Yeah,
She's probably right.
It may be a tool for certain projects or for certain things to get it across, but then step out of it and keep a distance. I'm not an endangered species because I still do not have a cell phone.
Yes.
So I do not feel comfortable with it. And it's not that I'm anti-innovation or anti-digital world or so. I'm not nostalgic for the world of the 16th century or so.
The book thing is an odd thing because often, years ago, I had this fantasy of creating my own version of the Harvard Great Books. And they would be 100 books that no one had ever heard of.
Including?
Things that I just happened on, that I came to love.
Can you give us an example?
Oh yeah, I found this book by Frank Weatherwax on training Lassie, which is a masterpiece of its kind. Another book, which I at one time wanted to turn into a movie, this actually is clearly one of the great books. Did I ever give this to you, Letters to Strongheart?
No.
Letters to Strongheart. Strongheart, for those who are not familiar with this story, alas, was the first of the great dog movie stars, pre-Rin Tin Tin, at the beginning of motion picture history. Legendary because he cried in a close-up on film. And you can see this tear that presumably was real, or at least that's the claim. And this man, J. Allen Boone, fell in love with Strongheart. and never had a chance to meet him. And after Strongheart died, he started writing letters to Strongheart. Okay?
Yes.
So the book is a collection of 80 letters to a dead dog. A complete masterpiece of its kind. But these are the books that people should be reading.
Right, but how do you come across a book like that?
See, someday I'm going to do my version of the 100 great books. It's
Sure.
one of the best things. Borges, they published recently a version of all of Borges's nonfiction, and in the back of it they have 2 lists of his perfect libraries.
Yeah.
And it's filled with his favorite books. One of the very odd things about it, and I consider myself kind of well-read, is that a lot of them I'd never heard of. And so I made it a kind of plan that I would read through Borges's library and turn myself
How many
into...
books does he have in these lists?
There's probably 100 plus.
Okay, yeah. So
And,
quite a project.
Oh, no. There's discoveries to be made that are really quite. The trick is to get off of the herd path. It's the
And
things
how,
that people
how do you find a book like the Letters to Strongheart?
on a remainder table. I was when I was an undergraduate, I would go into the library, and the book stacks on either side.
In Berkeley, yeah.
This was actually in Madison, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And there was an entire case of novels by Eden Philpotts.
Who is he?
And I thought, who in hell is Eden Philpotts? And this is before the days of Google and so on and so forth. Not so easy to research Eden Philpotts. And I read one novel by Eden Philpotts that I thought was fabulous. And then I forgot all about it. And I'm reading through Borges's list.
And here it comes up.
There it is. The Red Remains by Eden Philpotts. So somehow I felt this deep connection in a world of randomness.